priest is one. The fact that an Orthodox Christian is not Orthodox unless they are going to confession on a regular basis, and they are not in good standing, no matter how good about themselves they feel. Our culture has perfected an art hitherto not seen in the human race, and that is the art of self-esteem for no reason. We tell our young people in our schools, feel good about yourself whether you can read or not. Even if you don't know how to read, here, maybe you can learn how to use this condom. That's good. That's almost as good. That's our culture. That's our culture. That is our culture. A culture who has perfected the art of feeling good about yourself for no reason. Self-esteem for self-esteem's sake. Everything in the Orthodox tradition, everything in the writings of the Fathers, every line of the Philokalia screams against the great American vision of self-realization and self-esteem and slick organization. If the church teaches anything, it is that the problems the human race faces are not technical. They cannot be fixed by scientific invention. They cannot be fixed by clergy, laity, societies getting together to make things run better. The human problem is fundamental, and it is always the same in every age. And that is, it is a problem of the heart. It is a problem of sin. It is a problem of the lack of holiness. And nothing can be done, and nothing can change, and you're just simply moving around the deck chairs on the deck of the Titanic as she goes into the ocean. If you possibly think that little technical reorganizations will make any difference to the future of orthodoxy, if the fundamental is given away. Christ said the same thing in these words, and that is, he told us that if we find a field in which there is a pearl of great price, we sell everything, including our political or economic or ethnic biases, so that we can buy that one pearl of great rarity. And the Orthodox Church is the true home of that pearl. It is undefiled. It is perfect. Everything that is needed for salvation is within it. The tools are there for any who will use it. Those who do not use it are not sinful. They are more to be pitied than censored. I have a mental image of someone pulling a freight car loaded with pig iron down the side of a railroad bed in a field of deep mud, when you have the tracks laid out there next to you. And all that one has to do is get the car on the tracks and go. That is the equivalent of not using the tools of sacramentality, confession, worship, liturgy, obedience, humility, submission to a spiritual father in our church. And of course, in a sense, the secular culture has paid us a great compliment, because they have had the need to invent counterfeits for everything that some of us as Orthodox have simply squandered and thrown away. We do not go to confession as we should. The secular culture gives you all the confession you want. $120 an hour on our psychiatrist's couch. The psychiatrist, of course, can't tell you anything worth hearing. He certainly can't forgive your sins, because Christ never told any psychiatric association that what they bind or loose on heaven and earth will be bound or loosed. These words were not spoken to Freud. They were spoken to Peter. The secular culture will give you every single little self-help group you want. Every mutual aid society, Al-Anon, Alcoholics Anonymous, you name it. Because the secular culture understands that human beings need community, so they create false ones. The only true communities are the ones God gave. Family, church. That's it. Those are the true communities. Those are the communities from the beginning to the end of time. Family to church. Every one of Christ's instructions is dedicated to one of those institutions, inasmuch as human association goes on. Behold, he says to John, your mother, the family and the church. Christ taking the time there on the cross to show his mother to John and pass on the torch of filial responsibility for his family. So the secular culture understands what many Orthodox have failed to understand, and that is the need for these institutions. So the secular culture goes to confession. The secular culture has church communities. The secular culture has worship. They no longer worship God. They worship self-realization. They worship material gain. They worship being fashionably and politically correct. If they're in a university campus today, they have many gods they worship. And we Orthodox are not so much sinful as we are fools if we squander the true and then think that somehow the grass is greener on the other side of the fence, and we go to the counterfeit to replace what is there all along, free of charge, within the true church. And so my urging tonight is that as Orthodox Christians, what we do in this Lenten season is not look for new ways to be slick and fashionable and with it and accept it. Have the courage to slough off the baggage of that kind of second-class citizen immigrant mentality that's just glad to be allowed to live at the bottom of the white folks' garden, and begin to do two things. Take advantage of the fact that we live in an open society and not be the one group of people who think that being invisible is virtuous. And secondly, take advantage of the truth that has never been lost, thank God, that is within Orthodoxy, and actually be Orthodox Christians and make Orthodox churches places in which purely nominal dead wood people begin to feel uncomfortable. Not because they're not loved, not because they're not taken care of, but simply because they start feeling out of it. They feel out of it because everyone else is just too busy pursuing the real pearl in the field to be simply arranging one more social event and one more thing to fill the day. The last point I'd like to make in terms of being Orthodox and letting the Orthodox Church be the Orthodox Church is that I think the great challenge of the future is going to be to avoid the mistakes that we see writ large in the Protestant community and now the Roman Catholic community. And what a tragedy if we Orthodox Christians repeat those very self-same mistakes. The Protestants who have tried to be the most relevant to their society and compromise the most, which are the liberal Protestants, of course are now looking at empty churches. Because if someone wants to get the same politically correct opinion that they can get from the secular culture, they can get it much better from the New York Times and NBC than any preacher. And so when preachers start sounding like the New York Times, pretty soon people just stay at home and read their Sunday paper. And that's why Unitarian churches are echoing barns that once in a while have dances and concerts. And that's the sum total of their activity. The second lesson is to be learned from what's happening with the Roman Catholic Church. And that is that many Roman Catholic bishops today seem to be more concerned about being political think tank report writers on every issue from airline safety to economics in the third world, what have you, than they do in being a true prophetic voice for the one thing that they have been charged with guarding, which is the sacrament, which they are supposed to guard until the end of time. And instead of that, they're busy squandering all their moral capital, acting like two-bit local hustlers who are trying to get votes for dog catcher and curry the favor of a secular liberal media. Well, Orthodox Christians don't need this. We can afford to be the church because we are the church. We don't have to try to be fashionable or relevant for anybody. We can be Orthodox, and that is enough and always has been enough. And lastly, in the line of being Orthodox, I think in terms of the future, what we need to be looking at and why it's such a joy to be in a group that is surrounded by books and educational materials, and that is that we are living in a culture in which at every level, in its schools, in its high schools, in its colleges, in its media, is in deadly opposition to the idea of fixed moral absolutes. And if you and I send our children and the next generation out into this culture, not educated in what orthodoxy is, not knowing what their faith stands for, not knowing the fact that intelligent, honorable, brilliant men and women for centuries have been Orthodox Christians, if we send them out into this culture and they do not have this information, they have not been trained and educated, that we will have done something very short-sighted and very foolish. And that is we will have just fed our children to the wolves and they'll be torn apart. And that's what's happening with a lot of Roman Catholic and Protestant young people, and I dare say a lot of Orthodox people, as they head off into the secular culture, into the job market, into the universities, into the high school, with nothing, no equipment, because some fool of a Sunday school teacher thought that it was easier to teach them to color and sing some stupid Greek or Russian song than teach them about St. John of Chrysostom, who's a darn sight more relevant than Sesame Street, which is the level on which a lot of Christian education goes on. And one of the reasons this happens is because we are lazy. We have caught the lazy disease of our age. We're not reading the books we should. We're not educating ourselves. We are not listening. We are not learning. And so we have nothing to pass on. And my feeling is very strongly that in our age, if we feed our kids up the educational conveyor belt without having made a real and desperate struggle for their souls, then we might as well be like those KGB bishops who compromised the faith in Russia under Stalin and gave the list of their fervent church members to the KGB so they could be rounded up and shipped off to the Gulag. Because that's exactly what our universities are when it comes to faith. They are the Gulag in which true faith dies. And the only weapon is knowledge. And we, of all people, how miserable we are with the great and glorious heritage that we have in the Byzantine Empire, in the patriarchs, and in the fathers and the saints, in the intellectual tradition of Orthodoxy, in the intellectual tradition of the Hellenistic culture, going back into the theology school of Alexandria and beyond. If out of all that we cannot pass on information that gives intellectual respectability and real muscle to people's faith, how miserable we are. And how miserable we are, by the way, in comparison to some fervent Protestant groups who, while they are very misled, at least are trying with the few crumbs they have to pass on some information to the next generation. And so lastly tonight, surrounded by books and icons, and what better place to do it, I would urge you to look in this community and in your families and in your church and in the loved ones you have, the people you know, those you're responsible for ways to institute real Orthodox education and not make the mistake that our educational system has made in talking down to kids as if they're all morons who cannot be interested in anything except sound bites and 30-second television cartoons. I don't believe human beings have to be dealt with on that level. And I believe that with a little creativity and a little imagination, the heritage of Christendom, Byzantium, and the Church can be presented in such a way that we can send out a new generation of Christians who will not then be just another group of people either swept away by the secular culture, who run for the bunkers and spend their life hiding because they're so worried about sticking their head up and getting shot at, but instead will start having the courage of the future Chrysostoms and Basil the Greats that we are going to need. Because I feel that we're looking at a culture that is moving so rapidly towards the moral, ethical abyss that it is going to be our turn, probably within most of the lifetimes of those here, to look at the kind of collapse in our society that we're now seeing in the Soviet Union. The American materialistic dream just works a little better and will take more time to blow up in our faces, but it will blow up because it is godless. It is founded on nothing more than self-realization and greed. And if Christianity is true, it must blow up because we believe that man lives by more than bread alone. Thank you very much. I'll take some questions. Here. All right.
Wow. Yeah. What a voice in the wilderness and a beacon of hope and light. Beautiful. God continue to grace you with much health and happiness to bring this message, a message that is sorely needed. We embarrass him by applauding. That's what he was saying. It causes him great embarrassment. Father Apostolos, where are you? Okay, Father's right here. What we're going to do, and Frankie's been very kind to accept some questions. But what we're going to ask you to do, though, is Father will be kind of moving in about the aisles here. Raise your hand so you can clearly see. Frankie's not going to acknowledge you. Father will. State your question as quickly and succinctly as possible, and Frankie will provide the answer.
I would like to know how Frankie feels about homeschooling.
Well, I'm a fan of any alternative of the educational establishment. So, anything you can do to keep them out of the clutches of the educrats and the bureaucrats that have taken over our schools, do it. And if homeschooling's the way and your children are learning, they can't be learning less at home than they would be in public school, even if you just put them in the toilet with a comic book. So, basically, yeah, I'm a big fan of any parent who will take the trouble to do anything with their children rather than just throw them into the educational system. So whether that's a home school, whether that's a private school, or whether that's getting involved in your local public school, which is also an alternative to get involved in your public school, do it. But what we can't do is just turn them over to the state and expect anything except gangsters. That's what we're going to get, and morons, in about 50% of each.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm a guest tonight of Rebecca, and so I'm going to be very brave when I say that I am a born-again Christian.
Good for you.
But I think we in our churches, and perhaps we're some of the few Protestant churches who still get a strong sermon each week on personal holiness through daily confession and, daily dying to self, living for God's glory. And we also get called to take a stand morally. And I'm very excited to hear you talking to I don't know how many hundreds tonight, and to know that this is going on in other churches that previously I had thought wasn't getting the same thing I was. Do you foresee in the future any joining together of true, your church, your Orthodox church, with some of the Protestant groups that are truly following?
Well, I would say there's a two-part question there. And I think it raises an interesting point. The first thing is there already is a joining together in the sense that there are Christians who band together on the ramparts of the Second American Civil War that's already going on. For instance, outside of abortion clinics, in which there's a few hardy souls trying to turn back the tide of the abortion holocaust. You see Orthodox from Catholic Protestants who are out there who have more in common, at least in their stand for the sanctity of life, than they do that separates them. That's kind of ecumenicism in the trenches. And that really is going on, which is a good sign, because I think the Christians in this country are making a last stand, basically. And so if you don't stand on this issue, what exactly will get you out of your seat? If a child being murdered won't do it, I'd like to see the issue that will. So it's about time Christians got together on that, and people are. But I think it also raises another point that I won't go into in a lot of depth, but this whole idea of ecumenicism. The fact that the Orthodox Church is the church is not a theological statement, it's a historic one. Therefore, it doesn't mean that everyone in the Orthodox Christian is even church is a Christian, or that everyone outside of it is not. The Orthodox Church is the church because it can show you, as Irenaeus of Lyon would say, the list of the bishops that really do go back to the beginning without break or schism or offshoot. But what is sad to me is to see that some of the ecumenicism that has gone on, that Orthodox have been involved with, like the World Council of Churches and the National Council of Churches, has been an ecumenicism between believing Orthodox and what are essentially atheists. So what is so ironic is the ecumenicism that should go on between true believing evangelical Christians and true believing Orthodox Christians, in which there really is something to talk about, like how do we get the evangelicals into the real church, for instance. And I only offer that somewhat facetiously, but other things, like how do we shut down our local abortion clinic, things that would actually please Christ, rather than just fiddling while Rome burns. Those are the people that the ecumenical movement's not including, because on principle, those Protestants have stayed out of it. So what's amazing is that Orthodox Christians have been willing to get into bed with whores, essentially, the truth, and yet at the same time somehow have set up very few frameworks to talk to the people who really do go a long way down the road with us on the issue. So I would like to see ecumenicism, all right, but I would like to see ecumenicism in which Orthodox Christians sit down with people who aren't essentially members of the Nazi Party and actually pro-abortion, pro-adultery, pro-divorce, pro-lesbian bishops, pro-worshipping Gaia, the mother of the earth, pro-worship of the earth, pro-resurrection of the demon spirits of third world gods and goddesses, pro-psychology instead of sacrificial repentance. I would like to see the Orthodox, if they're going to have ecumenicism, at least try to figure out a way to sit down with real Christians for a start. Because otherwise, the message of ecumenicism, this argument that somehow, well, we'll leaven the lump, is like some Jew sitting down with the high command of the SS in 1939 saying some good will be achieved. Well, the good that will be achieved is they'll eventually haul you off, and if they don't haul you off, they're just keeping you around so they can look respectable. Because they're whores, basically. And so they're going to keep some guy around in a nice tall hat who still looks like a priest and not a witch doctor, so that it can make them look like they're vaguely still Christians, and maybe some little old lady in some United Methodist church will still throw them a buck or two and not walk out. That's why the Orthodox are kept around. The Orthodox are kept hanging around the edges of the World Council of Churches and the National Council of Churches. Don't kid yourself. They're being kept there by very sinful people who are playing a game, who know these are real Christians and who are using them. They have no more intention of moving towards orthodoxy than Hitler did of converting to Judaism. Sorry.
I would like to ask you if, in your capacity as a film producer, you could do anything or are contemplating doing anything in the way of education within Orthodox lines.
Well, there are two projects I'm working on trying to do something like that. I've written a treatment up for a 10-part documentary series that I want to do called The Quest for the Historic Church, 10 45-minute episodes, starting with the apostles, going right up through Byzantium and into our own era and some of the critique of Protestantism and so forth, so that, there would be something available to help teach, in which we would, be able to bring in people who really know something and tap the minds of great Orthodox scholars around the world and so forth. So that would be one project. And then on a much smaller level, just in a personal thing, I'm writing a book that I've been writing for the last 4 years, addressed particularly to Protestants as well as Orthodox on if you like, called Dancing Alone. And the subtitle is The Quest for Authentic Faith in the Age of False Religion. And in that book, I make a critique of the Protestant ethos and then an apology for the historic church. So I'm, basically over the years, I would certainly hope that the Lord would give me the ability and the opportunity to, use whatever abilities I would have in that area and also rope other people into it at gunpoint if it's necessary. Get them to do something.
How can a church which has a history of being Russian and Greek and coming from a history of a nation state reach out to a country like America, which really doesn't have a one culture, one people, but is Hispanic, is black? Mm-hmm. How can the Orthodox Church do that?
Well, I'd say one thing for a start. If you look at Orthodox history, we've already done it, in that when Cyril and Methodius went up into the Slavic countries, they didn't go to one culture. They went to many cultures with many different religious faiths and backgrounds, in fact, nomadic tribes in many instances. After all, these were the Goths and the Visigoths who had swept down from the north and raided the south many times. The Byzantine Empire was expert at, even on the political front, within one generation of including very disparate cultures. For instance, even a generation after the conquest of Romania, winding up with the Romanian emperor in about the year 800. And it is not outside of the Orthodox tradition to be able to deal with very disparate and far-flung cultures. But I would go back to what I said earlier. The way to do this is not by trying to meet people halfway and not by trying to compromise, but by being Orthodox. And this may sound naive, but I truly believe it's the case. The one thing this world longs for more than anything else is not a slick presentation, and it's not a way to throw the net wider and be inclusive. It's for somebody to stand up who knows what the hell they're talking about and what they believe. Why do you think Mother Teresa has the acclaim she does around the world? She has the acclaim because in Mother Teresa, the world has seen an example of sainthood. Okay? That's why. She didn't have a program or a TV show or anything slick, and yet the world beat the path to her to find out what she's doing. She doesn't have to do anything except be what she is. And so, if we have faith, and if we're real Christians, we will believe in the power of the gospel. The power of the gospel is not what evangelicals think it is. It isn't saying words or getting people to pray the sinner's prayer. The power of the gospel is in being Christian. It's just what Christ said. It's in the fruit. And if Orthodox Christians are real Christians, even a minority of them, because the apathetic majority will always be led by the active minority, principle of history, even a minority of them, that is the witness. And this culture will flock. This culture will flock to such people. They will not have to do anything. It'll be like Seraphim of Sarov or any of the other great saints who just went away for 28 years and then wandered out of the woods and sat in a little cell. And how did the thousands of people who came to him know he was there? I don't know. But they found out. Because here was somebody who stood for something and would tell them the truth. That's what we need. People who stand for something and will tell the truth.
I'm deeply appreciative of your very powerful message this evening. I'd like to know, was your father ever troubled by the kinds of questions that troubled you, and what role did he play in your spiritual journey and your ultimate goal or objective, being orthodoxy?
Good question. Yes, he was very troubled. The last book he wrote before he died had a very revealing, self-explanatory title, and that was The Great Evangelical Disaster. That was his last book. Yeah, that's in print. The Great Evangelical Disaster. And he spent the last 5 years of his life essentially exactly where I was at that point, And if someone asked him what he was, he would say, basically, I'm a Christian. And they said, evangelical, fundamentalist? No, I'm not an evangelical. Evangelicalism has gone down the river and is basically crossed. And that was really what he said. And he said it publicly, and he said it in that book. He thought it was compromised and essentially hopeless. So where my father and I parted company, because he died, not ideologically, was at that point where I started doing serious reading about alternatives. He came up to the point where he knew what he wasn't. He knew he was a Christian. He certainly did not consider himself an evangelical. And a very revealing thing, actually, a personal anecdote, if I may share it with you, of something that happened a couple months before he died. And that was he was in St. Mary's Hospital in Minneapolis, St. Paul, south of Minneapolis, St. Paul in Rochester at the Mayo Clinic, dying of lymphoma, cancer. And about 2 months before he died, he got up out of his bed in St. Mary's and crossed the street and picketed in front of the Protestant Methodist Hospital. St. Mary's is a Catholic hospital because they were doing abortion. And St. Mary's wasn't. And he said to me after that demonstration, he said, you know, when I was a go-get-em evangelical fundamentalist back in the 50s and 60s and thought we had some answers before the whole thing just dissolved, he said, I would have asked the nurse, who was a nun, take down this big crucifix in my room because as a Protestant I didn't believe in this thing. He said, no, I'm very glad it's there. Because he said, I now understand that somehow this hospital stands for something and the one I look out my windows across the road at stands for nothing. And that's why I'm going over there and picket it. Because essentially they're murdering babies in a hospital that's a Methodist Protestant hospital with evangelical foundation. And what's very interesting to me is how my father and Billy Graham at that point parted company. Because Billy Graham would always go to the Methodist hospital because it was Protestant, whether they're killing babies next door or not. My father, by the end of his life, had it with the Protestant ethos. And had it with this pluralistic relativism that comes in the wake of Protestantism. Because you must understand, as soon as you allow for 25,000 denominations all supposedly going to God, that is secular pluralism. You've now said there is no such thing as truth. We all just have our own interpretation. Great American way. So my dad got that far. He got to the point where he was glad he was in a Roman Catholic hospital, happy there was a crucifix opposite his bed, picketing the Methodist hospital across the road, whose doors he would not darken, okay, for treatment, and very much of the mind that somehow Protestantism had lost the way and certainly was not anywhere near the historic church. And that's as far as he got, and then he passed away. So in that sense, he had a lot to do with my spiritual journey because at that point we were tracking together, very, very much so. And since that time, I have felt no separation from him in the sense that I don't feel that I then went down some other weird path because he and I were very much moving along that direction. Now, whether he would have become an Orthodox Christian, I don't know. I can't say. He was a man of integrity. And he certainly would have if he believed it was true. He would have done it in a hot minute. He could care less about acceptability or anything else. So I would say, yes, very much we traveled together on that road. And beyond that, in terms of something much more basic, you know, from the time I was this eye, my father taught me to think and he taught me to name the name of Christ. And those are two things which are permanent and don't change when you become Orthodox.
As a college student living away from home, what do you suggest that students do to keep their faith?
Come home. Basically, I don't know. Check in with me in a year. My oldest son is just about to start at Georgetown, and we'll see what happens in a year. I'll check in with him. If he's lost his faith, I'm going to quit speaking and go back to the drawing board. I can't give you any quick fixes. All I can tell you is this. Hold this vision before you, okay? You are a college student in an educational establishment that believes that Christianity is old-fashioned and stupid and needs to be replaced with modern humanistic technological alternatives. But that same establishment, measured by its own criteria, has failed. The secular experiment has blown up in the face of the 20th century. It has failed in the Soviet Union. Leftist political solutions to economic problems in America have failed. All the great society programs of the 60s and 70s that were going to replace charity and philanthropic organizations have done nothing but produce a welfare ghetto. Feminism has nothing except 26 million abortions, a dehumanization of women to the point where now you have such things as date rape and all the rest of it are common. Well, why not? Because when the special attribute of a woman is removed, her divine gift of being the womb of the human race, all she is a nicely packaged walking sex machine. Feminism is an empty skull with a foolish grin. And 100 million mothers banging on the doors trying to get back into their homes and raise children who are now stuck in the workplace because of the way the tax structure now is organized to favor feminist ideology, say so. And so the one thing I would say is I can't tell you how to keep your faith because that is a matter of spiritual discernment and integrity, but I can tell you this, and that is you can, when you hear the pat secular line being given, know this. These people are like the last leaders of the Soviet Union in the 70s and 80s. They are living on borrowed time. Their system has failed. It's in ruins. They're playing a good game. The academic solutions to America's problems, the liberal, atheistic, secular, fundamentalist, if you like, solutions, have blown up, have failed, are miserable. The educational system is not educating. Our society is reeling from the impact of such innovations as values clarification in the schools, replacing ethics. All these things came out of the universities. They have a lot to answer for. So all I can tell you is don't be intimidated. And even if you don't have answers for every challenge thrown in your teeth spiritually, ponder in your heart and hold in your heart in the same way we read the Blessed Theotokos did, who we hear pondered all these things in her heart after the angel left and just sat quietly thinking. At least enter into that quiet space and know that the Orthodox Church is here 2,000 years later. The secular experiment that started in the 17th century in France in the Enlightenment is going to be finished within your generation. And unfortunately, I don't think it's going to be replaced by Christianity. I think the signs are it's going to be replaced by paganism. But it's going to be replaced by religion, not secularism. And that's why you now see all these weird cultic things, whether it's Gaia or feminism going into worshiping all these goddesses now and all the rest of it, because the secularists cannot live with their own world they've created. It's a failure. So I can't tell you how to keep your faith, but I can tell you this. If you're seduced by the slick secular package in a university, then you don't understand that these people are on their last leg. And if you could come back 20 years from now, they will have changed their tune so fast it'll make your head spin, just like all those smart-ass leftist Marxist professors are keeping their mouths shut as the truth about the Soviet Union unravels. Well, another 20 years and the feminists and all these other hotshot secularists are going to look just as stupid. The whole thing's crumbling in their hands. The reason why is because human beings, men and women, are all created in the image of God and are spiritual creatures, whether you say they are or not. And therefore, the truth will out. And since secular alternatives to faith are lies, because they don't describe reality as they are, it's collapsing. So all I can say is educate yourself in terms of what orthodoxy is about. Go see your priest. Have a confessor. Be accountable to him. And submit yourself to the discipline of the church in an age in which that's hard to do because no one's disciplined by anything. And if you will do that, and you will hang on to the knowledge that the secular alternative has failed, you have a shot. You have a chance. It's very tough, though.
In all honesty, I came here tonight to look at the beautiful books that you have here, and you have captivated me. With regards to confession, I have 3 small children, and my eldest one is in the 5th grade. And I find that when she goes to Sunday school, they really don't emphasize preparing or even going to the priest for confession. And I really think it's important that the church address this to the young children because I don't think they are going to confession. There's general, there's appointment confession. Can you emphasize a little bit about this?
Well, I don't think I can put it much more strongly than I did in terms of confession, but I would just say this, and that is that the church and priests and bishops, in my experience of reading church history, and certainly in the community in which I live, in Boston, that we have to be very careful we don't pass the buck. Because the fact of the matter is, the parent is responsible first to educate the child, not the schools, not the church, not the state. And we Americans, and I say we because I do this myself very much so all the time, we're always looking for someone else to take over what is essentially our duty. So the first thing the church needs to encourage is not the children to come to confession. It needs to encourage parents to be parents, to get their children to and be responsible for them, so that we don't then turn around and look for scapegoats in terms of a priest or a bishop and say, well, why aren't you doing more? Well, generally speaking, priests and bishops can't do more than their people allow them or encourage them to do. And so if you have parish councils taking over in a church in an ungodly and unorthodox way, it's usually because they got a gun to the head of their priest called his paycheck. And if you have parents that aren't getting their kids taught much in Sunday school, it's because the priest is in fear of his life, that if anything gets taught, they'll throw him out on his ear because he can't afford to be controversial and say, you're being, not you, someone is being a bad parent. Your kid's not coming to confession. Why aren't you teaching them this with their mother's milk? So it's the old synergy here, you know, the synergia that we all talk about in salvation. It's the same with priests and people. It's a two-way street. But I put the blame has to be fixed on our shoulders, you and me. And seeing the way the priests nobly struggle onwards in most Orthodox churches I visited, in spite of their parish councils, in spite of their people who want to have a Hellenic ethnic society instead of a church, in spite of all the to me, it is a testimony to the heroism of the priests and bishops of the Orthodox Church of North America that there's anything left here, because the kind of controversy that we keep feeding them, our little things, are the kind of things that for me, because I'm not a priest, I wasn't called to it, because I'm not saintly, I'd just hang it up. I'd go to 3 parish council meetings, and you'd find my hat and coat off the rack, and I'd be vapor, because I couldn't take it. Or I'd turn around and just say to someone, you whine at me one more time about whether there was enough Greek in this service or enough thing, and you're not even teaching your kids about confession, and your daughter is on her 18th guy she's sleeping with because you never taught her anything, and your son-in-law just married an atheistic Jewish girl because you never said anything about this, and you're coming to me whining about you didn't hear the Lord's Prayer in the Greek and we already said it in English? Boom. Right in the kisser. That's why you'll notice I don't have a collar. Because priests are godly men who have infinite patience, and my patience is about 18 centimeters long and quick fuse. So,
okay, there'll be 2 more.
I think we should just, we'll have 2 more,
2 more
quick ones,
questions, and that's it. 2 more.
Yeah. And then when we're done, I'll be standing up here if anybody wants to come up, so I'm not running off.
When someone hears about film producing, he just thinks of Hollywood and all the glamour that goes with it. How are you behaving with this spiritual spirit that you have in such a community?
Well, it's a good question. I don't live out there because very quickly, as I looked at the whole situation, I've spent a lot of time in California and so forth and so on, but I very quickly understood that it was going to be a choice between my family and my career. And I knew that I couldn't raise 3 kids in a Christian home as a movie director in Hollywood and stay faithful to my wife, be a good father in that community. So I live in a little New England village and basically am never in the right place at the right time. And it's very difficult. But the fact of the matter is, it's worked out very well, because what's happened as an alternative is that by not living in that community, not saying that no one should live there, but just personally not feeling that I could, being in the film business, not opposing some other business necessarily, but it's meant that I have been able to do the writing and the work and the speaking and the thinking and the reading that I never would have done otherwise, simply because I just would have been, going to endless meetings and lunch and so forth. So for me, it's been a better than even trade, and it's just been a practical matter of priorities. And the second thing is to tell you the truth. I enjoy making film, but I like writing much better. I like speaking much better. And so for me, it's been a necessary economic evil. Not saying the documentaries I've made on subjects that I'm interested in, but as far as I'm concerned, if you guys all go out and buy my next novel, Portofino, I won't have to do this anymore. So that's it.
Last question.
Last question.
Frankie, I just want to say that I want to say something and ask a question. I really think that the Holy Spirit has sent you here to be a prophet, and I thank him for that. And I want to ask you, in the challenge that you gave us to be Orthodox so that the dead would begin to be moved out, have you personally ever seen that anywhere?
Well, I haven't been Orthodox long enough to see much. But I would say this. I would say that, yeah, I have. Yes, I've seen it. I've seen it in the sense that all over the place, this church being an example, okay, you keep finding, against all odds, these incredible pockets of faith and practice and true belief. And you find them all over the place. So, against all odds, the Orthodox Church is out there. And it's not in all that bad a shape, all things considered. So, yes, I've seen it. And I've also seen it in another kind of evidence. And that is, I've seen a lot of people, and I know about them because I converted to Orthodoxy, so I've heard about them where they've written and so forth. I've seen a lot of people who, in a sense, are like the stones that Christ said could be raised up and become the people of God, in that if the people who inherited this aren't going to do the job, you can be sure the torch isn't going to hit the ground. God will just replace them. And the way God replaces the church is not through cataclysm, I don't believe, but it's through conversion. And sooner or later, there are going to be people converted to Orthodoxy who are going to throw open the doors and who are going to say, okay, I'm serious and I'm here now, and my family's here and I want my children trained and so forth. And this is going to happen all over the place. Because the fact of the matter is, there are hundreds of thousands of Protestants in this country, literally, who are, I believe, authentic, genuine, believing Christians, who have had it up to here with the chaos, division, stupidity, frivolity, blasphemy, entertainment, crap that Protestantism has become, no liturgy, no anything. And they're going to come, I think, in the next generation, the next 10 or 15 years, and they're going to bang the doors down of the historic church. And if they come in and there's a bunch of people sitting around having, an ethnic festival, they're going to say, that's great, guys. You go out there on the street because now there are 200 of us and there's only 50 of you guys left. And, we're not here to bicker about language. We're here to be served the blood and body of Jesus Christ. And we, like Jesus said, there will be those who will wrest the kingdom of heaven by force. They will just come in and take it. And that is, I believe, the way the dead wood eventually will get moved over. It will not be by some plan or by revival. It will simply be by the Holy Spirit raising up true children of the church in place of those who squandered it. And so I think the Orthodox churches have a choice in the next 10 or 15 years. And that is, they can be Orthodox, or they can sit there and dwindle while God raises up other Orthodox churches, or even brings people into their own churches who will eventually move them over. Because they're serious about their faith. They're not there to play games. They could care less about all the little bickering and rivalry. They want to be fed the sacraments. They're looking for a priest to confess to. And they want what the church has to offer, that great treasure. And they will have sold everything to get it. They will have given up family and friends, respectability, burned bridges. Everybody's going to be furious with them because, like this pastor, for instance, I'm writing to on Cape Cod right now, who's got this big Lutheran church. He's going to become Orthodox. He has a wife and 5 children. He'll be tossed out on his